Hey guys, if you want to learn Microsoft Azure from scratch and or you are planning to give Microsoft Azure certification, so this is the best video for you because in this video I have covered each and every topic which is given inside the study guide of Microsoft Azure. So I have covered each topic. I started from the very basic, what is cloud computing, what are the services we are having, what are the models we are having. So I have covered everything in this video. Then I have gone through the core services, what are the compute services, storage services, network services, and identity and access management services we are having. After that we have gone through the architecture of Microsoft Azure, how infrastructure is spread between regions, availability zones, and the fault domain. And then we have gone through the directory services we are having. Then we have gone through the networking services in each section, and then we have gone through the peering option we are having the VPN gateways. So we have gone through that as well. In the last we have gone through the management and governance services and also the cost management services in Microsoft Azure. And in the final part we have gone through the monitoring services we are having from Microsoft Azure. We are having different monitoring services that help us to troubleshoot, to analyze the services application in Microsoft Azure. So there are many things to learn from Microsoft Azure, and I have gone through each and every part what is given from the Microsoft side. So if you want to learn, then don't forget to go through this video. Each topic we will go thoroughly to understand better. So let's start this video. So guys, let's start with the first topic of this video, that is cloud computing. So let's understand what exactly the cloud computing and what are the essential characteristics of any cloud, how any infrastructure we can say it comes under cloud. So the delivery of resources as a service over the internet is known as a cloud computing, and these resources can be anything. It can be your computing, it can be your network, it can be your storage, whatever resources you are using for your application. These resources is provided as a service over the internet is uh, known as a cloud computing, and the party which provide these resources as a service is known as a cloud provider. So, or we can say cloud service provider. Next thing, what are the essential properties? Like if we want to launch our own cloud, okay, then what are the properties it should follow, then we can come under cloud. Okay, like Azure, AWS, we are having some clouds, right? So similarly, if you want to launch our infrastructure as a cloud, then what are the characteristics we should follow for our infrastructure? The first thing, it should be on demand. It should be available on demand whenever we need it, and it should be through the self service. Not like you need to raise request now and then you will get back after 1 day or 10 day, whatever it is. It should be like immediate basis. You can go to the portal, you can access the resources. That means it should be on demand. Next thing, broad network access. Broad network access means that it should be available from everywhere. Like you can use any device, you should have the access to the internet and you can access those resources. It should follow resource pooling. That means the same resources can be shared through by the multiple parties. So this should follow this thing. Next is it should follow rapid elasticity. Rapid elasticity means that whenever there is a need, it should be able to stretch, means it should be able to increase or decrease. Okay, the last thing, it should be follow measured services. So means whatever consumption we are doing of those resources, we should be meterized according to our usage. Not like we are, for example, we want an application that server is having 8 CPU, 128 gig of RAM, whole hardware I'm talking about, but we are utilizing one VM of only 2 CPU and 4 gig of RAM. So we should not pay for the whole things, we should pay for the resources we are utilizing for our application or the services. So this is the way we can define that if any infrastructure is following these 5 properties, comes under cloud. Now let's talk about next topic. Next topic is shared responsibility model. To understand this thing, we need to understand that in cloud there are always two parties. One is providing the cloud, one is utilizing the cloud. So the party which provide the cloud is known as a cloud service provider. The party which is utilizing these services is known as a customer. Either it can be you individual or you can be as an organization. So if we talk about an example of this one, cloud service provider, we are having multiple cloud provider in market right now, but the major ones are these: Azure, AWS and GCP. For the customer, like we can take an example of ourselves or our organization. So the next thing we need to understand how this responsibility is segregated between those. To understand this thing, I just simplified it. Whatever of the cloud and whatever in the cloud means whatever of the cloud means whatever the CSP is providing as a resource, as a service to you, they need to take care in terms of security or in terms of compliance. But whatever you are using inside that cloud after having the access to that resources, either it should be your data, it should be the kind of permission to the end user, everything you need to take care and you are responsible for that thing. So this is how a model that defines the responsibility of the cloud provider and the customer for security and compliance is known as a shared responsibility model in the cloud. Now we will talk about the third thing, that is cloud model. So we are having different cloud model. So a model that defines, or we can say that deliver the cloud services in different ways comes under these cloud models, and we are having three types of cloud. First one is public, private and hybrid. As name suggests, it's open for all. That means everybody can register and get the access to any resources comes under this cloud. When we are talking about the private cloud, that is the entity and belongs to some dedicated organization or any individuals. When we are talking about hybrid, it's a combination and utilization of both this kind of services, private or public. Let me take the example. If you are using as an individual or your organization using Microsoft Azure cloud to host your application or any kind of data, then you are using public cloud. If you are having the infrastructure that follow the cloud properties, or we can say the characteristics, and you are having this infrastructure in house, that is known as a private cloud. So there are multiple organizations in the market they are using. So we can say dedicated to individual organization. When we are talking about the hybrid cloud, that means they are having some component or the part of the services in house and some to the public cloud. For example, you are having everything related to your application like server, network, data, everything there, and you are running that from your organization, but you are hosting or keeping your backup to the public cloud. That means your organization is using both the infrastructure or the platform. So this comes under hybrid cloud. Now we will talk about the very important terms which comes for the cloud, that is consumption based model. What is consumption based model? Simply we can define that based on the consumption we should be paid for the resources or the services to the cloud provider. So a pricing model in which you pay for the resources only you use it. So for example, as I mentioned, cloud provider is having of hardware resources, or as I described earlier, of 8 CPU and 120 gig of RAM, okay, where our application server is hosted on top of that one. For example, this is our VM, but this VM is having only configuration on 2 CPU and 4 gigs of RAM. So we should pay only for the resources we are using out of that whole infrastructure. We should not pay for the whole thing, we just need to pay for this part. This comes under consumption based model, or we can say pay as you go model. So normally we are having different pricing model. We are having pay as you go model, as I mentioned this one. After that we are having two more, that is reserved, where we committed something like we want to utilize this resource for 1 year or 3 years, means there is some commitment that we can pay in advance, or we are reserving that resources. In that thing, what happened, we will get some discount. Another pricing model we are having a spot. That means we are every cloud provider having some unutilized resources. Okay, you can have the access to that one at very high discount. But the thing is, when they need these resources, they can alert you and they can take back these resources from you. That's why they are on high discount. But we can use it for running some jobs in our organization. So it's all depend on case to case basis when we want to use which model. Pay as you go model is always the high pricing. This is the lowest pricing. It's like a medium one. But here we need to give some commitment to the cloud provider that we will utilize these services or resources for at least 1 year or 3 years. It's all depend on your contract. Now we will talk about the next part, that is benefits, why we are using these cloud services, right? So we need to understand what are the benefits of using cloud. So the benefits of using cloud services are, it provides us high availability, scalability, it provides reliability, it provides predictability, it also provides security, and also provide easy management of the resources. So we no need to take care of those parts. When we are talking about the high availability, there are different ways to provide high availability to your resources, to your application, to your services. We can have the redundant infrastructure. So one instance go down, then we can it will be up and running on another instance with the fault tolerance. Next, we are it provides scalability. Normally we are having two types of scalability: horizontal and vertical. Horizontal is something when we are adding or removing resources or the servers. Okay, this is horizontal scaling when we are for example, right now your application is using 2 servers, but your load is increases, you want 4 servers, then you add 2 more servers or instances for your application. It comes under horizontal scaling. Similarly, you can reduce the number of instances in this one. When we are talking about the vertical scaling, that means it will be done on the same instance. Means right now your server is running with 2 CPU and 4 gigs of RAM, but your load is increases and you want more resources in on the same instance, then you can make up to it's all depend on you, not up to, but like you want 8 and here you want 16 or 32, whatever you want. Means you are increasing and decreasing the resources in the same instance, will come under vertical scaling. Reliability, as I mentioned, they are having huge infrastructure, they are having redundant infrastructure, so they provide reliability as well. Predictability, yes, they are providing some calculators where you can estimate the cost for the future as well. Next, it provides security because they are having the security expert there. They monitor or audit their infrastructure, even the resources they are using. So it provides better security, and you no need to worry about that part. And it provides different ways to manage your resources. Even you are outside your organization, you can have the access to your resources. You can use your mobile phone, you can use your laptop, desktop, whatever devices having the internet, you can easily manage your resources in the cloud. Now we will talk about the next thing, that is cloud service types. Based on service type, we are having 3 types, or we can say 3 models. These models known as infrastructure as a service is IaaS, platform as a service. We are having software as a service. In this one, this model is always the cheapest one, and it comes based on license purchase, like your Gmail account you are using, and from Microsoft you are using Office 365. This is a platform as a service, and these are the costliest, we can say, because here you will get the access to the server itself. On top of that, you can choose what operating system you want, what type of storage you want. You can have everything. Means here you will have more control, here you will have less control. More control, more costly; less control, less costly, means the cheapest. Here you will get the runtime environment. That means Here you will get the opportunity, and it's good for mainly for the developers. So directly they can use this platform to write their code, build their application, access to that application, run that application. So it's easy. They no need to worry about purchasing the hardware servers, then configuration of that server. Top of that, they no need to install any operating system. So they can save more time, they can focus more on the development side. That's why it's good for them. When you are talking about end-to-end control on your infrastructure, then it's a infrastructure as a service. The last service we are having, software as a service, that is license based model. It's the cheapest. Here you will have less control. Now let's move to the next topic, that is our based on geographical architecture of Microsoft Azure. So we will talk about region, we'll talk about region pair, even we will talk about sovereign region as well. So what are these, and how we can define in Microsoft in terms of Microsoft Azure. First, let's talk about region. Region are geographic location where Azure services are available. So whenever you log into the portal, you will find the region like APAC, America, Europe. These are the regions available, and in that regions we are having multiple availability zones. Okay, so these are the big location, we can say region. Then we are having region pair. What exactly the region pair? Region pairs are two regions that are connected by a high bandwidth, or we can say low latency network. So for example, this is region 1, and we are having another region 2. So if you see in APAC itself, there are multiple, okay, A1, B1, like this, A1, A2. We can have one more region with APAC as well. So the thing is, these are connected with high bandwidth, or we can say low latency network. When we are talking about the sovereign regions are the regions that are designed to meet the specific compliance requirement of a particular country or any particular region. Like if you are aware about GDPR relevancy, right? That is mainly specific to Europe region. So similarly, we are having multiple policies which are designated to particular regions. So these sovereign regions comes under that one. Now we will talk about the next topic, that is very important in terms of high availability, in terms of many things when we are deploying our resources, that is availability zone. So what are these availability zone? In short, we known as AZ. Okay, so availability zone are nothing, it's a kind of a different data center which are physically available within the region, that are isolated from each other. So for example, this is our region. Inside that one, we can have multiple data centers. These are the physically located data centers, and these data centers are known as availability zones, like AZ1, AZ2, and AZ3. In some region, there can be one availability zone, can be two, and can be three as well, but not more than three. Then the next topic is, mainly people ask me, what is the Azure data center then? Because we know that the availability zones are also physically data centers, but what exactly the Azure data center? So physical location where Azure services actually hosted. See, there might be possible that it's a logical boundary. Okay, inside that availability zone, there might be multiple buildings are there. So these buildings or these data centers are actual Azure data center. Okay, now next thing we will talk about Azure resources and resource group. Let's talk about both together. So Azure resources are nothing. The services which we are using, it can be your server, it can be your VCN, is virtual cloud network VCN, it can be your storage, whatever these resources known as Azure resources. Then what is resource group? It's a logical group of similar kind of resources. Like we can have the resource group for server, we can have the resource group for VCN. So whenever we create these resources, it should be part of at least one resource group. So whenever we create it, it will ask. If you will not define it, by default it will be created, and you can see the name in the portal itself when you are creating. Now we will talk about the next topic, that is subscription. Subscriptions are mainly used for billing purpose. Okay, in short, so a collection of Azure resources that are owned by a single organization. So it will be easy when you subscribe to any region, then you can have the resources in that region. So it's a kind of a collection of Azure resources that your organization is owned. Next, we will talk about the management group. What is management group? It's a way to organize subscription and resource group. So manage group actually manages the subscription and resource group. These all managed by management group. Next thing we need to know that what is compute, Azure compute. When we are talking about the compute, in general, compute are nothing where our application actually hosted. This is the application which is hosted on this server. Okay, so this server or with this instance can be anything. It can be your virtual machine, it can be your container, it can be your function. So there are different ways to host our application. So the platform or the instance where this our application or service is hosted is known as a compute part, and in Azure it's known as Azure compute. It's a general things that I'm explaining here. Now let's talk about the networking services. So Azure networking services. So when we are talking about networking services in Azure, Azure provides various networking capabilities that can be used together or separately. So there are different components come into Azure networking services. It can virtual networks, it can be your subnets. So let's note it down. Virtual networks, it can be your virtual subnets. Peering also are part of networking. We can have the DNS service in Azure. We can also have the VPN gateways. So we are having different gateways to connect our organization to Microsoft Azure. We can have the endpoints. See, these are just a summary. I'll discuss these points in bit details in next. So these are the networking services. Now let's talk about the Azure storage services. So when we are talking about the Azure storage services, there are different storage capabilities provided by Microsoft Azure. These storage can be different kind of. We can have the blob storage. We can have Azure disk storage. And also we can have Azure files. So these are the commonly used storage in Microsoft Azure. Then we are having services like IAM services. These are bit relevant to security. So in this one, Azure services that provide identity, it's provide for identity, access and security. These are the services related to these aspects. So in this one we are having Azure AD, in short we known as AAD. We can have Azure rollback policy, so Azure RBAC, and we can have Azure Defender for cloud. So let me explain you. Azure AD is mainly used for managing identities. RBAC is used for role-based access policies, means it will take care of permissions. And Azure Defender of Cloud, these are the services for the security of your Azure resources. Now we will talk about the management part or the services which are relevant to management. So in this one we will talk about Azure management and governance. When we are talking about the management and governance, we need to talk about the cost management. We need to talk about the compliance and governance policies. So these are the things comes under this section, and the services which are related to this section is Azure Cost Management Service and Billing Service, Azure Blueprint, and Azure Policy. So these are the services part of this section. So what are these? Azure Management and Billing, Azure Blueprint, and Azure Policy. So what exactly we are doing right now? We are going into a module like where we are having compute, we are having network, we are having storage, we are having this IAM services, we are having Azure management and governance services. Now we will talk about these services, individual services from each section. So first we will go through the compute section. So inside compute section, our first service is container instance. So what is container instance? It's a lightweight stateless compute option that is used to run containers. So this is the service which will help us to run containers, and it's a very lightweighted. And the thing is, the best part of container is you can have the required library and dependency within that container, so you can run your application on any of the platforms, so you no need to worry about the hosting platform. So it's like a portable option, and in DevOps it's mainly used. So if you know Docker, containers, Kubernetes, these all comes under DevOps, and container is the means primary component where our application is running. Next we are having virtual machines. Virtual machine, you know, right? It's like your desktop or laptop or server where our application is running. So it's like you have the hardware, top of that there is hypervisor that divides this hardware into multiple virtual machines. On top of that virtual machine you are running your applications. So these are the virtual machines. It's a kind of a software emulation or the template of a physical computer. VMs can be used to run a variety of application and services. Next we are having Azure virtual machine skill set. So it's known as Azure virtual machine skill set. So it's a way to create and manage a group of identical virtual machines. See, there are many applications where we require multiple machines, and these machines need to be identical in terms of configuration. So in that case we use virtual machine skill set. Okay, it's kind of a load balancer. It can be used behind the load balancer mainly. Okay, next we are having availability set. What is availability set? A way to group virtual machines together so that they are placed in different fault domains and update domains. This helps to improve the availability of your application. See, as I mentioned that availability zones are used for high availability. So for example, we are having this AZ-1, AZ-2, AZ-3. So if we want, let's take like this. This is region 2. Similarly, we are having region 1 as well, where we are having AZ-1, AZ-2, and AZ-3. Now the thing is, when you want redundancy at region level, you host your application here and here as well. Similarly, if you want redundancy at availability zone level, then you host your application here and here as well. Similarly, we are having availability set. So it's like within availability zone, we are having some fault domains. As I mentioned earlier, availability zones are nothing representation of our data centers, and it's a logical boundary, but it's a physical location. Okay, so the thing is, these are the fault domains available within the availability zone. So we can host our application here and here, so we can treat them. It's like within a building there are different floors, and in these floors our applications are hosted on different floor. So if something happened wrong here, or there is a maintenance on this floor, our application will work from another floor. So it's like there are multiple ways to provide your high availability to your application and services. It's all depend on case to case basis which one you need it. Now we will talk about few concepts which can help you for your Azure exam. This time we will talk about the resources required for your application that you should know. So resources required for your virtual machine where your application is running. So normally what is required to create your virtual machine? You require a storage where your OS or your data will be hosted. Next, you require a networking to provide connectivity. Also, you require a compute resources. It's a configuration of your virtual machine. It's like CPU and RAM. So these are the primary component which is required for any virtual machine. But here we have the flexibility that we can choose the amount of each resource that is based on our need for the virtual machine. Now let's talk about the next topic, that is application hosting options. What exactly is? So in Azure we are having variety of ways to host our application. We can use Azure App Service, we can use our virtual machines, we can use containers, and we can use Azure function as well to host our application. So these all comes under application hosting options. Now we have covered the compute section. Now we will talk about mostly on the networking side. So first we are having virtual networking, or we can say virtual cloud network, or VNet also known as in Azure. So in different cloud there are different words but the same meaning. So Azure virtual network is nothing like VNet. It's like a private network, we can say. When we are saying private network, that means the resources within this network will have the connectivity by default. Okay, so we can create whenever we create any resource in Azure, we need to provide the network for that one, so we can understand from which network that component or resource belongs to. VNet can be used to connect your Azure resources together, and also it helps us to connect to the through the internet. So there are different gateways used for that one. We will discuss in detail in few minutes. Now let's talk about the next topic. Next topic is Azure virtual networks. Sorry, Azure virtual subnets. Subnets, you know that it's a we divide this network into a subnet in small network. This small network is known as a subnets. Okay, these subnets can be two types. Either it can be private or it can be public. When we need to connect the resources within Azure or within Azure network, we will use private subnet for that one. When we need to connect our instance to the public network, means the internet, then we will use public subnet for that one. Now let's talk about next topic, and that topic is peering. What is peering? Peering is a connection between two networks, and these networks can belong from the same region or different regions. So we can have two types of peering. One is local peering, or it can be your remote peering. When the connection is between two networks within the same region, for example, this is VNet 1, VNet 2, and we are having peering between this is known as a local peering. But when we are having the peering between two networks, those belongs to different regions, then this type of peering between these two networks is known as a remote peering. But the thing is, whenever the traffic will go between these two peered networks, it will not expose to the internet. It's like a virtual tunnel, it will go through. Now let's talk about next topic, that is Azure DNS. It's a managed DNS service that you can use to host your domain name. Similarly, what we are having outside, domain name system, which help us to convert your name into IP address. Similarly, it's a managed DNS service in Azure, which can host domains. Now let's talk about next topic, Azure VPN gateway. So what are these gateways? So VPN gateway is a kind of a way to connect your on-prem network to Microsoft Azure. This allow you to securely connect your on-prem resources to your Azure resources. Okay, so we can have on-prem environment. On-prem is nothing like your organization. It's a public cloud. It can be Microsoft Azure, AWS, whatever it is. Okay, so we are having two type of way. Either is we can connect through the VPN, means virtual private network. It's a software defined network that can help us to connect to Microsoft Azure, or we can have a direct connectivity, that is dedicated connectivity. It's through the express route. So VPN gateway is used to connect your organization to Microsoft Azure. Now we will talk about the endpoints. As I mentioned earlier, we can have two types of endpoints, public endpoints and private endpoints. So when we are talking about the endpoints, it's a way to control access to Azure resources. Public endpoints are accessible to the public, while private endpoints are only accessible to specific Azure resources. Okay, so when you want to have access from the internet, then we will use public endpoint. When you want only the Azure resources, specific Azure resources should have the access, then we will use private endpoints. Now we will talk about storage part, because we have covered the networking part. Now we will talk about storage part. In that one, our first topic is storage tier. Okay, if you remember, we have mentioned there are three types of storage we can have. We can have blob storage, we can have disk storage, we can have file storage. So Azure files we are having, these are the different kind of storage we are having. Not only three, there are many, but the primary, these are three. Similarly, we can have different kind of storage tier as well. So Azure storage services offer different storage tiers that you can use to store your data. The different tiers have different performance and the cost character. So this tiers is kind of, you can understand, there are some data that you need immediate access, right? There are few data that you don't need immediate but infrequent access, we can say. There are few data that is very rarely used. Okay, so that's also comes under infrequent but very rarely used this data. So this type of storage tier comes for archiving purpose. This is like storing your data in a hard disk kind of, and immediately like booting your OS or something, it will be used for your or running your services and all. So there are different storage tier we are having based on the performance. Similarly, the frequency of accessing this data varies your cost as well. So when we are talking about this one, archiving one, this is the cheapest storage option we are having. When we are talking immediate access required, that is the costliest option we are having. So this is kind of a general understanding of storage tier we are having in Microsoft Azure. Next, in Azure, we will talk about the redundancy options in terms of storage. So what we are talking about? So what exactly it is? Azure storage services offer different redundancy options that we can use to protect our data. So for what purpose it is used? Protection of data. So multiple level, our data is stored at multiple places. So in case if this storage get failed, we can have access to our data from this storage. So we are having different redundancy options, and based on our requirement and redundancy requirement, our cost will vary. If we are looking for highly redundant data option, then our cost will be high. If we are looking for just for testing purpose, we can choose the cheapest one. It's all depend on redundancy option as well, because when we are looking for 2 copies of storing our data, same data at 2 places, so obviously we need to pay twice for that one. Now we will talk about the next topic. Now let's talk about next topic after the redundancy options. So the next topics we are having storage account options and storage types. Storage types we have already talked, right? It's like blob, disk, or files. So storage accounts can be used to store a variety of data. The different storage types have different performance and cost that we already discussed earlier. Now the important part of this one is options for moving files. See, we know our storage is used for storage of storing our data, but we need to know what are the options we are having to move our files. So we are having different options. First option is we can use AZ copy command. We can also use Azure Storage Explorer, or we can also use Azure File Sync service. So we are having 3 options to move our data, means move our files from this storage, and these options are AZ copy, Azure Storage Explorer, Azure File Sync service. Now we will talk about the migration option. So far we have discussed moving files options. Now we are talking about migrations options. Okay, so there are a variety of ways to migrate our data to Azure. That means if we want to migrate our data from our organization to Azure, what are the options we are having? So we are having 2 options. Either we can use Azure Migrate service. It can help us to migrate our data from our organization to Microsoft Azure, or we can use Azure DataBox service. If you are preparing for AZ-900 exam, so this is for the foundation level, so you just need to know the options what we are having. Now we will talk about the services related to IAM. Okay, that means we will talk about identity, access and security services. So first options we are having directory services in Azure. So Azure offers a variety of directory services that we can use to manage our identities and access. These services known as Azure AD, or we can have Azure ADDS service, Azure Active Directory Domain Service, and Azure AD Connect. So these are the services we are having for directory services in Microsoft Azure. Now we will talk about the authentication methods which we are available in Microsoft Azure. So auth methods in Azure. Azure offers a variety of authentication methods that we can use to secure our resources. That's why we use authentication. Authentication means it will validate your identity. That you are the actual person who should access this resource, and these methods include SSO, single sign-on. We can have multi-factor authentication, and also we can have access like passwordless. So we can have different methods to access resources in Microsoft Azure. These are the few methods mentioned here. Now we will talk about the next topic, that is external identities and guest access in Azure. How we can provide access to external identities to our Azure resources. So Azure allows us to grant access to your resources to external users and guests, and it can be done through the Azure AD B2B service. So the service which is used to which help us to access our resources to the third parties or the external identities, known as Azure AD B2B services. Now let's talk about next topic. It's very important. In this topic we will talk about the conditional access in Azure AD. So it's a kind of a feature in Microsoft Azure that Azure AD allows you to control access to your resources based on variety of factors. These factors can be your user's location, it can be based on the devices, and it can be based on the applications. So Microsoft Azure provide conditional access in Azure AD based on location, devices, and applications. So these are the factors you should be aware on which Microsoft Azure provide conditional access. Next topic is Azure role-based access control. So in short, it's known as RBAC, Azure role-based access control. So it's a way to control access to your Azure resources based on roles. So RBAC allows us to define different roles with different permission for your resources. So you know, in your organization there are few persons who belongs to networking team, so they should have the resources only on the networking resources, right? Similarly, for the team which is related to database, they should have the access to only database resources. Similarly, that means it provides permission to only based on the roles. So RBAC handles the permission in Microsoft Azure. Now we will talk about one of the most important topic in terms of security, and it's applied to every cloud. Okay, the concept of zero trust. When we are talking about the zero trust, just understand by default it will not allow anything without authorization or authentication. So it's a security model that assumes that no user or device can be trusted by default. So no access by default as per this trust policy, and zero trust requires you to verify the identity of every user and device before granting them access to your resources. So it validates users and devices before granting access. Now we will talk about the purpose of defense in depth model. Sorry. So a security model that layers multiple security controls to protect your resources. So it's a security model that having multiple layers to protect our resources. The defense in depth model makes it more difficult for attackers to breach your security. So what it do? It to provides security at multiple layers. So it will help us from breach of security from the attacker side. So it's a concept of defense in depth. Now we will talk about the next topic that is related to cost. So it's a cost management in Azure. So Azure offers a variety of tools and features to help you manage your costs. So these tools includes Azure cost management and billing portal. Next option we are having Azure cost analysis tool. Also we are having Azure pricing calculator. So these are the different tools we are having through which we can manage the costs in Microsoft Azure. Now we will talk about the factors that can affect our costs. This is also one of the important section in terms of certification. The cost of your Azure resources can be affected by a variety of factors. These factors can be your resources. So high configuration resources require higher cost. It can be your location as well of your resources, means there are few regions where we have higher cost than in comparison to other location. The amount of usage, if you use more resources then your utilization is high and you need to pay more for that one. So and also the pricing model we are having, as I mentioned, there are 3 pricing model. So our cost also depend on our pricing model what we choose. If we choose pay as you go, then your cost will be higher. For reserve, then it will bit less, and if you go for the spot, it will be the cheapest option. But here you have the more reliability in these two. Here we can't get more reliability on this one because Azure can take back these resources any point of time when they need it. Now we will talk about the pricing calculator and the total cost of ownership calculator. So these are the 2 things that we need to understand. What are those? Pricing calculator and TCO, that is total cost of ownership. So Azure pricing calculator, where it help you to estimate the cost of your Azure resources. So it is used for estimation the cost of our resources. And where we can use TCO, it helps us to estimate the total cost of ownership of your Azure solution itself. See, what is the difference when we are talking about? We just need to know that how much our virtual machine is billing, or storage, for storage how much we are paying. We can use pricing calculator for that one. But TCO is something when we are having whole solution. TCO will help us to estimate the cost of our whole solution. So this is the difference between these 2 tools. Now as we discussed here, we are having different options here. So now we are going into one by one. So first we are having Azure cost management and billing tool. So what exactly it is? It's allow us to track our Azure cost and usage, and we can use this tool to identify areas where we can save our money. So what is the purpose of this? It helps us to track cost and resource usage, so we can save money based on our report. So it will help us to identify the area where we can save our cost. Now next is about the tax. Tags are kind of a label for your resources that will help us to search that resource, and it will help us for billing as well. So the main purpose of this tags are, it's a way to categorize your Azure resources. You can use tags to track your cost, manage your permissions, and automate your deployment. See, for we are having different kind of resources, right? We are having compute resources, we are having networking resources, we are having storage resources, we are having DB resources. So these are the different resources which belongs to different teams, and now we want to calculate the cost only for the networking resources. Okay, so we can provide some tags on that one based on department, based on office, based on organized. It's all depend on our requirement. So these tags can help us to track the cost for that particular office, particular organization, particular department, particular devices. So it's all depend on your utilization, how you want to use these tags. So these tags are very useful in terms of filtering, we can say. So whenever you want to deploy something, you can use the automation with the help of these tags. Now we will talk about the features and tools in Azure for the governance and compliance. So now we will talk about features and tools for governance and compliance. So there are different tools we are having. We are having Azure Blueprint, we are having Azure Policy. So if we will talk about Azure Blueprint, Azure Blueprint is a way to create and deploy reusable templates for your Azure resources. So it can help us to ensure that our resources are configured in a consistent manner and also compliant. So if we have the approved template, it's kind of a template, we can say, that we can use to repurpose it, means the provisioning of resources of same kind, so it will be security compliant. Now we'll talk about the Azure Policy. It's a way to automate the enforcement of our organization security and compliance on the resources which we are going to deploy, and it helps us to reduce the risk of misconfiguration. So it will help us for reduce misconfiguration, and it enforce organization's security to the resources. Now we will talk about the service trust portal. So the service trust portal is a way to assess the security posture of our Azure resources, and it helps us to identify areas where we can improve it. So what it do? It assesses the security posture and help us to identify area where we can improve security. So Azure Service Trust Portal help us in that way. Now we will talk about the features and tools for managing and deploying Azure resources. So the topic we are going to cover now: features and tools for managing and deploying Azure resources. So we are having different tools that help us to manage and deploy our Azure resources. So these tools can be your Azure portal. We can have Azure Cloud Shell. We can have Azure Arc Service. We can have Azure Resource Manager, and we can have Azure Resource Manager templates. So we are having different options that can help us to manage and deploy our Azure resources. So let's talk about one by one. Azure portal, it's a web-based interface that you can use to manage your Azure resources. So if you have not yet used the Azure portal, then it's recommended before going for any certification or hands-on, just to try to go through the free tier account. So you will get some dollars there, $200 are there, that are more than enough to explore the services which is available in Microsoft Azure. Next we are having Azure Cloud Shell. It's a command line tool, so command line interface, so known as a CLI tool as well. It's a command line interface tool that also help us to use to manage our Azure resources. If we will talk about the Azure Arc service, it's a way to extend Azure management and governance to your on-prem resources. This can help you to manage your resources in a consistent manner. So where it can be used, it can help us to manage on-prem resources. So from Microsoft Azure, we can manage the resources in our organization. Azure Resource Manager, it's a service that you can use to create, manage and deploy Azure resources. So the purpose of this service is create, manage and deploy the resources. So Azure template, it's a way that help us to automate the creation and deployment. So for what purpose it help us? Creation and deployment automation. So the service which used for automation, it's a ARM templates. Now we will talk about the monitoring tools. Available in Azure. So if we will talk about monitoring tool, we are having different monitoring tool. The first one, we are having Azure Advisors. If we talk about what is the purpose of Azure Advisor, it provides recommendation to help you improve the performance and security of our Azure resources. So what is the purpose of this one? It provides assistance or recommendation for the performance and security. So it helps us to improve both the things. So it's a very important tool, and in terms of examination also it's a very important. Next tool we are having Azure Health Service. Azure Service Health. And this service provides information about the health of your Azure service. It can be used to identify and troubleshoot problems with our Azure resources. So how it can help? Provide info about Azure service health. As I will share this guide with you, means this notes, so that's why I am documenting, and it will help us to identify and troubleshoot problems for Azure resources. So these are the tools we are having in Microsoft Azure for monitoring. We are having few more monitoring tools. Let's talk about them as well. Next tool we are having Azure Monitor tool. Or Azure Monitor service we can say. It helps us to collect and analysis telemetry data from your Azure resources, and this data can be used for monitor performance, health and security. So for what purpose this? It can help us for performance, health and security. It helps us for to collect telemetry data and help us for analysis that can help us to monitor performance, health and security of our Azure resources. Next tool we are having Azure Monitor Alerts. So Azure Monitor Alerts allow us to notify when there are problems with Azure resources. This can help us to take corrective actions quickly. So if there is any issues in terms of CPU utilization, we can say memory high utilization, in that case it will share the alerts. On the basis of alerts we can take the corrective actions. So it will help us for corrective actions. Now we have mainly talk about the resources, your infrastructure, security concerns, many things which Azure monitors, right? Now there is a service called Application Insights. This also comes under monitoring tool, and this Application Insight service help us to monitor our application. This service can collect telemetry data from our application, and this data can be your performance data, it can be your error data, means error logs kind of, and also it can be your usage data. And this data, the data which it gets, can help us to troubleshoot problems with our application and to improve the performance. So these are the monitoring tools we are having in Microsoft Azure. So we have completed the content of Azure Fundamentals certification here. So in this video I have how I prepared, let me tell you. So I have gone through the guide which Microsoft provided, and I have taken all the services from each point. I took it, based on that I covered each topic and explained based of my knowledge. There are few documents I followed. So these are the things, and I hope it will help you to learn Azure. It will help you to crack your Azure certification, and you can follow my video on Microsoft Azure where I explained 150 plus questions. Even I explained these concepts there earlier. So it will definitely help you. It will help you while you are working. So now you are aware about the fundamental services, where we talk about the core services, architecture level, management and governance. So these are the few things you should know for this certification. I hope you find this video helpful. If you find it helpful, then don't forget to click on like button, share with your friends so it can help them as well. Subscribe to this channel for more videos. Also connect with me on my Telegram channel, where you will find these notes there in the doc section or file section. You will get it. See you in next video. Till then, happy learning.